Thank you very much. So I'm going to talk about the pharmacokinetic safety and efficacy of bictegravir, emtricitabine, tenofovir, alafenamide, or TAF, single-dose regimen for children between 6 and less than 12 years of age. These are my disclosures. And then to start off with, firstly to thank all of the participants and their families and the study personnel at all of the sites. So the introduction then, bictegravir or BIC is a new unboosted integrase strand transfer inhibitor. It has very low drug-drug interaction potential. It's co-formulated with FTC and TAF, single tablet once daily, and without regard to food. It's already approved for adults in most of the developed world, and this is after 4 phase 3 studies showing high rates of viral suppression and no treatment emergent resistance to any of the components. It's well known that TAF has improved bone and renal safety compared to tenofovir disoproxil fumarate or TDF, and also the PK safety and efficacy of this formulation in adolescents is similar to that of an adult, and we now report on these parameters in virologically suppressed children. So the primary aim was to determine the plasma PK of BIC and evaluate its safety and tolerability of the regimen through 24 weeks of treatment. And then the secondary was to evaluate safety and tolerability through 48 weeks and also antiviral activity at weeks 24 and 48. So this was the study design. The eligibility criteria, again, we've mentioned the age and weighing more than 25 kilograms, being virally suppressed, that's less than 50 copies for more than or equal to 6 months, CD4 above 200, and an estimated GFR greater than 90. This was a phase 2-3 open-label, multi-center, multi-cohort, one-arm study. Part A was intensive PK, and that was to confirm the dosage. And Part B was a follow-up with including new recruitment for 48 weeks to look at short-term safety. And this was after an independent data safety monitoring review. So for the PK, intensive PK, and this was at steady state, weeks 2 or 4, looking at exposures of BIC as well as FTC and TAF. And the comparison was with adults' reference ranges. And the method used was the percentage geometric least squares mean ratio with a 90% confidence interval for the 3 drugs. And the predefined equivalence boundaries were between 70 and 143% of adult values. The safety assessments were standard, adverse events and lab abnormalities, efficacy, viral load and CD4, and the tablets were also assessed for acceptability and palatability using age-appropriate questionnaires. And then adherence was a measure of drug taken versus drug dispensed. So looking at the disposition, firstly, for Part A, the intensive phase, 27 children were screened and 25 enrolled. There was then an IDMC evaluation of the PK data, and approval was given to proceed with Part B on the basis of the data that they saw. So Part B, 31 patients were screened and 25 enrolled, and for both Parts A and B, the enrollment went quite quickly. So the total in this cohort was 50, and none discontinued and are all on the study drug. Looking at the baseline characteristics, firstly, the median age was 10. You can see a nice range between 6 and 11. A good weight of 29, females slightly more than males. And in terms of the race, a fairly good spread across the races, with the majority being black children, also some Asian and white. In terms of countries, again, good enrollment in the 4 countries. South Africa had slightly more, but also well represented in USA, Thailand, and Uganda. The CD4 count, the mean was 930 cells, and the estimated GFR was 153.5. And the time since diagnosis of HIV was a median of 10 years and ranged between 2 and 11 years. Looking at prior ARV treatment before the switch, you can see for NRTIs, the majority was idovudine 3TC, followed by Bacavir and 3TC, and a small number were actually on fixed-dose combinations taken twice daily. For the third agent, the PI was usually lopinavir ritonavir was more common than the NNRTI, and then a small number were already on integrase strand inhibitors. So now looking at the intensive PK and the main objective of the study, looking at the area under the curve over time, that's between dosages, 24 hours, looking at the ratio of children to adults in the last column, you can see that they were fairly equivalent. Looking at the Cmax, it was a bit higher than for adults, but with the ratio within acceptable limits. And looking at the lowest concentration over the dosage interval, it was lower in children than in adults, but also the ratio being acceptable. In terms of the high Cmax, no exposure safety issues were noted. And looking at the lowest concentration, that level was 14 times higher than the protein-adjusted effective concentration. So it was still a more than acceptable concentration. Looking at the other components, firstly the FTC, what you can see is that both the area under the curve, the Cmax, and in fact also the lowest concentration were higher than adults. The GMR was slightly higher for area under the curve and Cmax, and equivalent but slightly lower for the lowest level. For TAF, again, the exposures, area under the curve was a bit higher, and the Cmax was also a bit higher, and you can see the percentage GMR at 175 for area under the curve and 170 for the Cmin. However, these values for FTC and TAF were consistent with historical data from adults, adolescents, and children using FTC TAF products, including the elvitegravir, cobikistat, Genvoya. Looking at overall safety, firstly, this was over 33.6 weeks of evaluation. You can see that there were, as always, adverse events, most common of which were upper respiratory tract infections, and none were grade 3 or 4, none were serious, no one discontinued, no deaths. And in terms of adverse events related to the drug, there were 6. And you can see a list, 1 each: abdominal discomfort, diarrhea, fatigue, increased, decreased appetite, dizziness, headache, and rash. Grade 3-4 lab abnormalities were very uncommon. There were 4 that resolved fairly very easily. In terms of changes in the estimated GFR, at the end of the study period, it was -11, and that's in keeping with competing with creatinine for tubular secretion. So your serum creatinine actually rises because of that. So again, this is a known effect and is not considered clinically significant. In terms of virologic outcome, and you can see that the children remained suppressed. The CD4 counts remained essentially unchanged, and this was a snapshot analysis at week 24 and involved 25 of the 50 participants in the study. None needed resistant studies. In terms of adherence and participant-reported palatability and acceptability, all regarded the combination as palatable with an acceptable shape and size. The adherence on the whole was excellent. Median was 98.8%. So conclusions, again, children between 6 and less than 12 years weighing more than or equal to 25 kilograms. The exposures of the 3 components, BIC, FTC, and TAF, were consistent with what was seen in adults in phase 3 trials. It was well tolerated, good rates of virologic suppression, and the efficacy and safety were again consistent with earlier data. So the data from this study suggests that this could be a treatment option for children and supports further investigations with age-appropriate formulations for younger children. Thank you very much.